Good morning, Sherry Lynn.
Good morning, Francesca.
So you should be able to see that there is a recording on the top of your tech, whatever you're using this morning.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you for joining me. This is a great conversation today about art therapy and the benefits of therapeutic art. And we're specifically going to be talking about Mari today. But first of all, Sherry Lynn, I want to thank you for joining me. It's been a while since we've last spoken about this very same subject, art therapy and therapeutic art and Mari. And what better time than now to continue the conversation and further exploring the possibilities of using this for healing. So thank you again for being here and joining me. And if we could just sort of jump right in and have you start by telling us a little bit about your life experience in terms of becoming a psychotherapist. I know you're a very dynamic communicator, and you've had your own journey that's led you to being a psychotherapist. So if you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you, Francesca. I always love talking with you, and always love talking about Mari. So it's great to be here. So it has been quite a journey, Francesca. You know, I'm turned 57 this week, so a lot of years have gone by since I began to think about this. So as a young person, I chose a reliable nursing career over an arts education. And I really can't complain. Nursing has been really good to me. I retired from nursing about 2 years ago after 33 years of working as a nurse. I worked, I got to travel. I got to work and live in New Zealand, in Australia, in Canada, of course. I worked most of that time in critical care. So I was with people who were really in challenging times. Often they were dying, and so I got to support the patient, the family. It was really an honor to be there. You know, I've been with people who are being born and people who are dying, and it's the same kind of honor for me. So that's been really good for me. But during all of that, other things are happening too. For one thing, I was an ordained minister for over a decade, so an ordained lay minister. And so I worked with individuals. I worked with peacemaking. My focus was on community building, and I had some really amazing experiences all around the world, actually working through the church. So that was really amazing for me. Also, my creative urges. I wanted to do an arts education, so I still had a creative urge. So I was constantly experimenting, making big quilts and pottery and painting, all kinds of art forms I was playing with. What else was I doing? So in the midst of all of that, I was also dealing with my own inner hurt and my own trauma from my childhood things. So I was in therapy. So I remember being about 25 years old, seems like a long time ago, and having this dream that one day I would have an art studio, and in one end of the studio I would do therapy with abused kids. So that dream has pretty much come true. I don't work with kids, but hey, we all have an inner child in us, and that's a big part of therapy, is that the vulnerable part of us. So I am working with abused children that have grown up. I think I really did need to do my own inner work before I was ready to be a therapist for anyone else. So when my kids were almost grown, I got a master's in counseling. I got trained in a few therapeutic modalities, and I opened a private practice in my home while I still worked as a nurse. So that was about 12 years ago, and I couldn't be happier. So my life experiences have really led me to here. I feel like I didn't start out wanting to be a psychotherapist, but I took care of I took care of communities, and I took care of sick people, and I'm a searcher. And so eventually I began to take care of people's psyches and their emotions and their relationships. And so the natural unfolding of that was to become a psychotherapist. So my areas of specialty are relationship and trauma. And it's funny, they very often go together. So it seems that, whether we know it or not, our past trauma shows up in our current relationships. And so that's often a place where we start.
Interesting. Our past trauma often shows up in our current relationships.
Mm-hmm. We don't always recognize it as past trauma. We think it's the relationship, but it's very often the past trauma. Yeah, little t trauma, big T trauma.
Right, right. And really that's, I think, your area of expertise is helping your clients unwind all of those layers. So, how does your work then offering counseling take someone through, let's say, a Mari experience, just as one modality?
Mm-hmm.
How does that impact the lives of your clients?
Yeah. Well, Francesca, when I start working with a client, way before we even start talking about the issues, my first job is to create a safe relational space. So for some people, that's pretty easy to do. For others, particularly people who have complex attachment wounding and trauma, that might take several weeks or even months. So people start to tell their story. So there's an interesting thing that happens when I say, in the beginning, I said, tell me about your life. And they would start to recount this story, and they would tell me about people and places, and it was a really detached way of telling their story, almost like they were talking about another person. So it felt like when I heard the story told that way, that somehow by allowing that I was somehow re-traumatizing them, because it was a disembodied story. It was an accounting of their life. It wasn't a story of their lives. So I think the sharing of a person's story is at the center of our relational, our therapeutic relationship. And so I think that our stories are sacred. I think our lives are sacred, and we need to create space and time to honor, to tenderly hold these stories, to let them open and unfold as they will in the moment, because how I understand my story now might be different than how I understood it then. And so it takes time for that processing to happen. So one of the big ways that I do that is to create relational safety, is I do a Mari. And I do a Mari almost always in the second session. So I meet you, I get a little bit of your details. Then the next session, we're doing Mari. So Mari is, the client draws the mandala. They choose their colors, they choose their symbols, they match them with colors. And, telling a story from this place tells the story from the gut, from the body, from the emotion. And then the cards are laid out there on the great round. And there it is, the story told without words, in colors and in symbols. And the client sees their story in a whole new way. The things that they, including the things, particularly the things that they don't have any words for, are still there. Things that they wouldn't have told me on the first run, because I'm now seeing them in color. The emotion is there. The body experience is there. Mari shows all of that. The relational dynamics in their lives are there, right there, without them having to speak about it. So now that we have seen, the client and I, we have seen their story, we have felt their story, only then can we begin to actually talk about their story. And so that is a really important piece of creating that relational safety. I was thinking about a client that I had, that I'm going to tell you a real quick story about her. Her name's Lisa. Well, it's not really her name, but we'll call her Lisa for now.
Okay.
She's given me permission, so we'll share this part of her story. So the first time I met Lisa, she was cutting her arms as a way to deal with her overwhelming emotional states. Second session, we did a Mari like we always did, and Lisa was very moved by her Mari experience, and she went on her way. We didn't talk about the arm cutting or what to do about it. It just came up as part of the story. Well, what was really interesting and amazing is that week, when those intolerable emotions came up again, instead of cutting herself, Lisa went and got a piece of paper. She actually asked to take a pack of pastels home with her. So she went and got a paper. She got a deep red pastel. She drew a mandala, drew a circle. And then instead of doing this, cutting, she used the pastel and she did the cutting
Wow.
on the mandala.
Wow.
You know, and I knew her for many, many months, and never did I know her after that to ever cut again. So now she had an outlet that had the same visceral experience, that it didn't hurt her. And so she could do that in the meantime, kept her safe, made her feel more confident, more in charge. You know, a part of her wasn't upset with her for hurting herself.
Right.
She just put it out there. And then we could begin to look at what are some other ways that she could begin to process all of those emotions that were just
Right.
overwhelming her. So that's the power of the Mari.
That
Is
is very powerful, very powerful. And of course, everybody's story is so uniquely their own life experience. From some of my own clients as a Mari practitioner, I have some of the images drawn behind me. So these are
Mhm.
experiences. And as you were speaking earlier about these traumas, and you were talking about people talking about themselves in like little bits and pieces. And for me, I look at that and I would call that soul loss. Soul loss, as in all of those fragmented pieces of ourselves that we pull together. And as you said, comes together on the great round where we can visually see what's going on or where we are at this moment in time. I know Mari has showed up in my life at the right time when I needed to articulate or find some sort of language for something I couldn't actually verbalize, but I needed to see what was going on in my life. And that's where I found Mari extremely beneficial, to look at those places where you might be stuck sometimes in your life, and you know you're stuck, but you can't figure out, well, where am I going to go from here? And I think Mari is a huge benefit for that. And I know with one of the images behind me here, if you look, it's a circle and it's broken down into 4 quadrants. There's the most fantastic information that can be discerned from each one of those quadrants when we're looking at it on the great round. And you were just starting to talk about layering up Mari on the great round with the symbolism and those color cards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, when you were talking about the mandala again there, so 2 things that I was thinking of. One is, when we've been traumatized, we're on guard, right? We're on guard, looking out, looking out, looking out. You know, how is so-and-so today? Are they angry? Am I going to get hurt? And if that's the experience that we have, and our brains work this way, these are healthy brains that have experienced trauma, that are on guard all the time. So we stop looking inward. We stop looking at thinking about what we feel. We got to see what's going to hurt us out there. And so we spend our life getting into a habit of that. We don't go inward. And Carl Jung, when he talked about the mandala, he said that because the mandala is not a square, it's not a triangle, it doesn't have any corners, every part on the mandala in a circle is equal. Nothing is higher than the other, nothing is better than the other. And he said that the mandala gives us an opportunity to fall apart and put ourselves back together. So what we do in the mandala is allowing ourselves to disintegrate, looking at all the pieces and putting ourselves back together in a way that fits better now. Because maybe I'm not being traumatized now, but I'm still acting with the same kind of reactions as I did then. So now I get an opportunity to put myself back together in a new way. So
Absolutely.
I love that.
And as you say, you can recognize where changes need to be made. So it's that fantastic journey of self-discovery that it allows you once you have had that experience. And how are you going to move forward is completely up to you. It can be a completely new and open pathway.
Yeah, it is great. So yeah, it is. People are amazed at seeing themselves this way. It's always been there. I love working with teenagers. I sometimes go into schools and I give them all a mandala and they draw them. And there's this amazing language that teenagers are beginning to have, that Mari gives them a language to speak about the self, because it's not a thing that they're often taught. And so they begin to be able to talk about their inner world through the Mari. So it's
So as a therapeutic tool, then in your opinion, why does Mari work? And what are some of the therapeutic benefits?
yeah. So well, when we've chosen color, maybe we should talk just for a bit about what actually a Mari is.
Absolutely.
Would that be okay?
Yeah, for
So
sure.
the first thing that happens in a Mari is we give people a piece of paper with a circle, and we ask them to draw a mandala, just like what's on the wall behind
Like
you. Those
these.
are 6 different mandalas,
Yes.
and it doesn't matter what they draw. It's just trusting and drawing what's inside. It's not intended to be a piece of art. And we set the mandala aside for a moment, and then we lay out all of these. We have these cards, and these are plastic transparent cards with symbols on them. There's 39 of them. We lay them all out over a white piece of cloth, and then we ask the client to choose 6 cards that they like. That's it. It's simple. 6 cards you like, and they choose 6, and then we ask them to choose one that they don't like, one that sort of bothers them or feels uncomfortable, and then we ask them to choose 2 cards that might somehow offer guidance or wisdom. So once they've chosen those 9 cards, then we lay out these color cards. So there is 45 different colors.
Yeah.
Right? And we ask them to match each of these symbol cards with a color that feels right in that moment. So it doesn't, there's no right or wrong color. It's just the way that it feels. And then once those cards have been matched with a color, the Mari facilitator lays them out on a great round. And now the client can see everything right in front of them. Their inner world has now been expressed outside. And there's a change that happens in your brain, literally, when you begin to see this on the outside. There's a Mari facilitator in Russia, and she's done some work where she's and I'm not quite sure how she does this, but she's got some kind of tool where she looks at the activity in the right side of the brain and the activity in the left side. And of course, the left side of the brain is really about thinking and structure and time and language. And the right side of the brain is about images and sensations and colors. And when people sit down to do a drawing, before they start, she does it, and it's mostly left brain activity. After spending 10 minutes doing a mandala, it's now even, and half an hour after that, it's mostly right brain. And so we go into our own bodies more from the right brain and our own sensations. So to have somebody witness and to witness your own experience, most of us have not been seen or heard or understood enough. And so to have it sitting out there in front of us, it's a really satisfying experience for people. There's a real connection with the self and where we are in different parts of our lives. So it's a way of looking at ourselves and that the world doesn't support.
It's interesting because it's almost an opportunity to give ourselves permission to just be okay with whatever has come out on the Mari. Let's just be okay with that, with where we are. Now we have the opportunity to look at things, as I said before, how we can make changes moving forward. But there's some sort of safety that comes from just being in the presence of Mari. Perhaps if you're with somebody like yourself that is going through a counseling session, it is truly a very safe and sacred space.
It really is. Yeah.
We should tell people what Mari stands for.
Oh yeah, so Mari is an acronym, MARI, and it stands for Mandala Assessment Research Instrument. So this was a tool that was created by Joan Kellogg. She's an art therapist in the 80s and 90s, and she worked in a psychiatric unit to start with during her doctorate training. And she had people draw mandalas. That's what she did. She was a fan of Carl Jung, who did a mandala every day for 14 years or something to look at his inner world. So she had these clients just draw a mandala. They spent their time drawing. And then she said, tell me about yourself, in relation to this drawing. And she began to see patterns. She began to see that people who were experiencing a loss showed certain colors, certain symbols in certain places on the circle. And people who were experiencing new beginnings showed other colors and other symbols in other places on the mandala. And she began to think about all of that and began to see connections between people. So one day, after having spent years doing this, and she didn't just do it in the hospital, she started doing it. She used to have parties. You would show up at her house and there'd be 12 dots on the floor and you had to pick your dot, and that meant something about you. So it was she also worked with the folks like Stan Groff and some of these people who were exploring consciousness. And so that was their life. And they were immersed in this exploration of the unconscious. And so that was her whole life, not just her job. So everybody she knew was drawing mandalas for her, and they were exploring. So one day she sat with all these mandalas on the walls around her, and she sat in this big empty room, and she meditated for quite some time and thought about all that she'd experienced. And she came up with the Great Round, which is the systematic way of looking at life, using all these symbols and colors that Carl Jung had begun. So that was her contribution to it, was to systematize it, to make it in a way that the left brain could understand it. It wasn't just some beautiful colors, it actually meant something.
Right, right. And I think even the colors, I mean, she did a lot of research in regards to the colors that were chosen as well for her system.
Yeah, so Joan speaks about, and we teach about it now, there are two ways of looking at the colors and the symbols. One is the universal meaning of a color. For example, the universal meaning of green, as one of the mandalas behind you shows the trees and the grass. The universal meaning of green is about nature and about healing and about growth. So that would be the universal meaning of green. But there's also a personal meaning of a color or a symbol. And so the personal meaning might not correspond to the universal meaning. An example of that might be, this isn't true, but let's say when I was a little girl, hanging up behind the fridge, there was a green belt there. And whenever Daddy got drunk, he hit us with it. So if I chose that shade of green, it might not represent healing and growth. It might represent humiliation, pain, fear. But the real cool thing about symbols and colors is there can be a universal meaning and a personal meaning, but it's also possible that it can be they can be both at the same time. So if I chose that color of green, I might be trying to heal, do some healing around that experience that caused me pain and humiliation. And so that's part of the magic of symbols and colors, is that they can represent many, many things at the same time.
Right, right. You know, so much has changed, Sherry Lynn, since the beginning of this year with the coronavirus that has hit almost every part of the world. And then most recently, the protests around the world. So taking all of that into consideration, because life has really changed, turned on its head, I think changed perhaps forever, and we have to sort of look at things in a new way moving forward, how we would like to experience living in this world. For people dealing with and working with and coping with trauma, just with crisis alone, how can therapeutic art or something like Mari help people heal?
Yeah, there certainly has been a lot of suffering and continues to be a lot of suffering. And it's heartbreaking. It really is. I shed a few tears myself. But one of the most profound things that the Mari has given me, Francesca, is an understanding of the cycles of life. It actually underpins my understanding. So when I'm struggling, I can go back to the Mari and hold this way of looking at life. So Mari, the Great Round, represents the cycle of life, all living things. And so everything fits into it, whether it's me learning how to play a guitar, or whether it's racism in the world, or whether it's COVID isolation. You know, those things can fit on the Mari at some place in the Mari. So the Mari down here, so Mari progresses from bottom up to the top and down. So when we start at stage 1, where we enter the world as a potential speck, to the point where we become a baby that is born into the world. And then through the development and skill development and ego development, where we can now create and change the world in the ways that we want to, all the way over to the other side where the disintegration has to happen. It's a natural part, so that we can make room for this new beginning of potential again, for the circle to continue. And so to be able to see where we are on the wheel of life, right? Where we are, and to be able to name it and see it and feel it and accept it, things begin to change. When we resist emotions, when we resist struggle, it keeps us embroiled in it somehow. But when we can stop for a moment and say, okay, this is it. This is where we're at. Good or bad, this is it, without judgment. Once we do that, something changes. Something begins to change from that place. And so the other thing that happens if we get stuck, so we do get stuck. People get stuck in grief. People get stuck in pain. People get stuck in power struggles, and we don't know how to get out. The great thing about the Mari is that if I'm stuck there, Mari psyche keeps wanting to move. So we keep, by nature, the nature of life wants us to keep moving around the circle. So if I'm stuck here and I can't get out, and I'm stuck and I'm stuck and I regress and I'm stuck, Mari shows me the next steps. Maybe I need to be stuck here. Sometimes it's okay to be stuck. We don't like some of these stages, but they're necessary. And so when we see what the next stages are, our psyche can see them too, even if we're not there yet. So our psyche begins to see the way out of that stuck place. So visually, viscerally, we can feel it, what the next step is. Even if we're not there yet, there's hope that it will change. And so that's one of the most important bits for me. Also, when we're experiencing trauma, racism, COVID, every kind of trauma that there is, we become, our healthy survival brain makes us keep looking at the outside, looking for what's going to hurt us. That's how our brains are meant to keep us safe. But it does that at the expense of being aware of our inner world. So Mari invites us for an hour or two to go inner for a moment. And I think the world isn't giving us the answers that we need right now. So the only place to go is to the wisdom that lives within every human being. It might be well covered up by all kinds of nasty defenses, but every human being has the answer. So will Mari change, what's happening in the world? I don't think it's that simple. But I do think that before we decide what to do with what's happening, before whether we will protest or whether we will write letters or whether we'll do some act of kindness or whatever it is that we think we need to do, whatever our personal response is to these challenging times, I think it's a good idea to pause, to check in with our inner self. And so Mari invites us to go in and listen to our deepest inner wisdom. And if we do that, we will act, I believe, that if we can actually access that true wisdom, that we will be able to act with the greatest integrity and with, that aligns with our inner values. So that's how I think Mari might make a difference for people and other artistic creative expressions.
Right.
Because it comes from here.
Right.
We create.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's a wonderful explanation of the benefits of Mari and how it can help. And if there was one piece of advice you would leave our listeners with today, especially people struggling with mental health issues, what might that advice be, Sherry Lynn?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would want to say is it's not a weakness to ask for help. I think it's actually a strength. It actually represents your ability to care for yourself. And it's our human nature to need other people. It's okay to need other people. So one of my teachers, Harville Hendricks, is famous for saying, we are wounded in relationship, and it is in relationship that we heal. So if you're in need of help, reach out and keep asking. Keep asking till you get what you need, because sometimes people aren't very open to hearing. So you just keep asking. You know, I met a woman in our art group the other day, and that's what she tells her kids: if I'm not hearing you and you really need me, keep asking until I get it, till I hear you. Keep
Right.
asking. So keep asking until you get what you need.
So important, and that's a wonderful piece of advice to share. Thank you very much. And if you can believe how fast time flies, this is a subject matter I could talk about probably for hours on end. I love the exploration of Mari, and I truly believe in it, the power of it. And I thank you for your time, your wisdom, and your advice on Mari and the therapeutic benefits of art, therapeutic art in general. But what I'd like to ask you before we finish and wrap up here is if people are interested in connecting with you, Sherry Lynn, because I know you do counseling and you're doing some online counseling at this moment in time before you get back to doing in-person visits. How can people reach out to you if they are interested in connecting?
Yeah, so you could call me directly on my cell phone, 905-869-3898, or you could look me up online on my website, sherrylynnpsychotherapy.ca. There's a contact page in there, and we can chat.
Fabulous. Sherry Lynn, thank you again so much for your time today. I look forward to having another discussion. Maybe we'll do part 2 another time. Thank you so much. Until next time, have a fabulous day, Sherry Lynn.
Yes, you also. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye for now.